Hey everyone, it's Millie.
It's Gabby.
And welcome back to another week of Change by Degrees. And this week we have episode 83, That's All She Wrote. Never mind that Gabby decided to include a man in this episode, but I think that was a really good title.
I thought it was going to be Writers. That's All She Wrote.
Oh, sorry. Episode 83, Writers. That's All She Wrote.
Because if we just do That's All She Wrote, it makes it seem like this is our last episode or something. Like, we're done. We're not.
We're not just yet. But this is going to be our every season we have an episode on history. If you remember, I remember fondly Gabby yelling at me over Peter last season. And we have so much fun. That was chaotic.
Was that only last season? It feels like a billion years ago.
I was in college, so maybe it was like 2 seasons ago.
Whatever.
But we typically have one every season on history, and it just so happens because we don't talk to each other about what people were going to pick before, and it just happens we picked all writers. So that's pretty amazing.
So we have four.
We have four, and Gabby has some fantastic stories she's going to share at the end.
I just think it's really funny.
I usually have like a little joke to start us off, but I'm going to leave all the jokes for Gabrielle.
I don't. Here's the thing. It's stuff that I think that, like, I find history really hilarious, and so
we never learn from it. But
this one instance is, to me,
this is for the end.
I know. I'm not going to say it. I'm just saying it's a disclaimer. Like, I think it's very funny, but I doubt anyone else will find it as hilarious as I do. But that's okay. So don't get your hopes up. It's just,
I'm really excited to see what she has planned for us. But we're just gonna dive right in because I don't know. I wrote notes and I still probably will get it all wrong. But considering what we said last week, that we are still this week on the charts in Lebanon. Hey everybody, I don't know what y'all doing.
I don't know why, but Lebanon really likes us.
And we like you too.
Yeah.
We love you too. And I decided to pick a writer from Lebanon, and they're all the people we picked are deceased. So
yes, because I know last time there was some
you picked a person who's still alive.
Yes, I did.
And
I
don't even
remember who we talked about last time, either of us. That's very bad, but whatever.
Terrible. But yes, so the person I picked is Emily Nasrallah. I probably butchered that last name. I'm so sorry. Like that. How would you pronounce
Nasrallah?
Nasrallah. And she was born July 6, 1931, and passed away March 13th to 2018. So really recently. But to open this little story time, I was going to give you a quote from her, which I thought that Tim, our boss, would love her so much because she talked a lot about storytelling. So to open up, a quote from her is, "I am a story. We are from a simple village and my family are peasants. I lived my childhood working in the fields with my family, planting and harvesting olives and grapes." And she kind of said her introductory bio. She was the eldest of 6 children, born into a Christian family. I don't know if that's true or not. Some sources were differing on that, but apparently a Christian family. And she was born in the village of Kifr. Again, I'm not sure about these pronunciations, but it's in South Lebanon. She took the 3rd grade 3 times, or was in 3rd grade 2 times, because that's the level that they could go to. They couldn't go any higher. So I'm just like, I couldn't do that. But she wanted to.
I'm just going to keep taking 3rd grade until they tell me to stop.
And she didn't. The school didn't offer any classes past that level, but education was important to her. So she had written to her uncle that was actually living here at the time to see if she could get some money from him to afford to go to school. And he did. He did provide money, and she left home to study outside of her village at the International School of Cheofet. That's the last name that I'm going to butcher. I think there should be no more names. I always get so stressed out trying to read these. But during this time, she also worked as a journalist in a women's magazine called The Voice of Woman, a political magazine, for 17 years, mind you. That's a lot of work. And as a teacher while she finished her degree. And that already, I'm just like, she had 3 jobs while she was studying. And that's so amazing to me. Just the amount of work she does. So I'm just going to continue on because I don't want to get lost in the sauce. But during that time, she was dedicated to her family. She got married to her husband, Philip, and had 4 kids. And she spent her time writing both fiction, nonfiction, novels, children's stories, and short stories. So she has a broad amount of work.
She covered everything.
Everything. And along with all the articles she published in the magazines that she was working for. But I wanted, before I talked a little bit about her work in detail, talk about her childhood and what was inspiring to me, because she fondly remembers her grandmother, and she says that her grandmother was a storyteller, and that's where she got inspired to write stories. And from the rest of her family also, her maternal uncle, separate from the one who paid for her education, was really invested with her at a young age to develop her writing. And she would give her writing prompts, which I thought was really, really cute. She would be like, who does this house belong to? Or where does this tree come from? Or write about the mountains. And I think that when I reviewed her writing later on in her life, it was reflective of almost these uncles' teachings and how he was really invested with her at a young age, along with her husband, which I thought was really, really sweet, because she always shared fondly with interviewers that he would say, "You are free to do what you want. You write what you want." Like, this man did not care.
He was like,
just
whatever, who am
you
I to
do
tell
what you
you?
want to do. They had 4 kids. She was always invested in her family life, and when she had free time, she would write, and she wrote a whole lot. And I thought you would also like this. While she was in school, she credits her teacher, Nasim Nassar. It was her Arabic language teacher, so I'm sure you relate to that, and how much he helped her develop as a writer. And she quotes his red correction pen, the harsh
Triggered.
criticism from that. And I'm like, that must be a thing in the writing community. It's a red pen.
Yes, always a red pen.
Always a red pen,
It's
which is so
glaring.
funny to me.
It's when you get that paper back and it's just we used to call it in class, like, it just, the paper's bleeding. And we'd say, how much is your paper bleeding? And the person next to me would be like, look, and be like, oh, God.
So she apparently recollects that fondly. So I think we all relate to that as creatives, that, hey, we can take harsh criticism and be really grateful to those people who helped us grow out of our not so good writing our works. So it was really funny to me that she just recollected all these people who poured into her, despite being born in the situation she was in, whether it was her grandmother, her family, her uncles, and now this teacher. But the first publication that she's very well known for, and Gabby didn't recognize it. I was so happy Gabby didn't recognize this person. It's Birds of September. It's her first novel, published in 1962, and it's about her siblings immigrating away from her village. And a lot of her work was based on immigration outside of this village, and she kind of quotes her grandmother with the sentiment that it's a land that doesn't hold its people. And she was so sad. It's said that when she was done writing the book, the pages were drenched with her tears, because she was just so sad that her whole family left. And she stayed there her whole life, even though after writing about immigration, her writing shifted to talk more about the Lebanese Civil War, which lasted for 15 years. Like, I didn't know anything about Lebanon, but it lasted for 15 years, and then she wrote even children's books, one of them being What Happened to Ziko, which is a little cat. It's a children's story from the perspective of her daughter's cat, and them living in their house until eventually it was bombed in 1982. And a lot of people find it interesting that she didn't try to, like, dummy down what was happening. She was very graphic in a sense, and just was straight up. And this cat eventually stays in this area, this house, even though the rest of the family has to move away because of the bombings. But yeah, I just thought that all her writing, whether if it was immigration, speaking on the war, and she didn't say she was a feminist, but sometimes we say that, but she did speak for woman and justice for women. I thought it was really interesting, though, that she said she wanted women to be equal to men, because as she went to school and worked in these magazines, she saw that women could progress if they were just given the opportunity to be so. But she didn't want to preach to women, because she said women know themselves and their fields of work. So she's like, I'm not going to speak for that, but if I see injustice, I'm going to speak towards it. And through her whole life, she really, really valued just individuals. It doesn't matter who they are, where they're from, what work they do. She said, although there was many problems with my family and the pull between the city and the countryside, or with the war. She's like, we still have to value human beings. So I don't know. It was really interesting. And I think if you learn more about her and her work, it offers a really unique perspective as to Lebanese history, which I have to admit I was completely ignorant of. But it was amazing. And then two more pieces that I think is good to note is Flight Against Time, which is about an older couple who moves away from this city, again, immigration, to both Canada and New York, and experiences kind of alienation coming from a different land, and just that unique perspective, because a lot of the people who review her work are saying how the female protagonist has this battle when they move away from their homeland, in their workplaces, in their families, just in relationships. And then, of course, in the war, when she started talking more about the war rather than immigration. And lastly, From the Harvest of the Days is a collection of articles in 3 parts about violence against women. It's about women poets and politicians, and life in Beirut and its artistic perseverance. So she has so much work, whether if you're into politics, if you're into just short stories, into novels, into children's literature, she's covered everything.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just thought it was so fun to learn more about her. Apparently, German listeners are very, very into her. I don't know why. She even got recognized specifically in a German museum because she had like a relationship with them and had conferences, and she's like, my German listeners are so great, I don't know why. So that was really funny to me. I don't know why.
Yeah, it's kind of strange, but
out of all the places, they're like, we like this chick, and I like her too. And then lastly, an ending quote that I thought Gabby would appreciate is that she said, just as the rooster has to crow, so we have to write.
That's nice.
And I think she's truly an inspiration, and I have to do more research. Maybe I'll end up reading a book from hers.
That'd be cool.
But yeah, she just wrote so much about so many things, and I can relate to that. She was just,
that's pretty cool.
Just writing.
I really like discovering new authors, and
I was surprised you didn't know.
No,
she's like the most famous like
Lebanese
woman. Yeah, Lebanese writer.
Never heard of her.
They're like super proud that she's from Lebanon and spoke as to so many things, whether it's women's rights or the Civil War, or immigration, and how she's like, this land doesn't keep its people.
Which is a really interesting concept that comes up in a lot of Middle Eastern literature. Not just Middle Eastern literature, but specifically in my mind, it comes up in Middle Eastern literature. Is that's always a theme, not always, but a big theme throughout like Middle Eastern literature, whether the person is Arab or Israeli or whatever, but that there's always this tension between the land and people wanting to stay because it's their home, but not being able to because of war or famine or different opportunities or better opportunities. So, and even like different Arab people that I've had conversations with here have said that without, outside of the context of literature, have said, I didn't want to come here, but I had to because I want my children to have opportunities, or I didn't want to live under the regime that, and so, but they express that they love their country and they love their home, but they can't stay. And so, which is also very interesting. And that is what literature is. Like, that's why certain things are literature and certain things that are written aren't literature, but literature, at least the standard definition of literature, is literature that reflects the time period or the people group or the country that it's in. That's what makes it literature. So when you think of classic literature, like when you think of, I don't know, and plus it brings in themes and stuff that are then perceived as canon. But I think with Middle Eastern literature, it's very much reflective of its people, which makes it like kind of the standard definition of what literature is. So it's just so, and I think you're right with, what's her name, Emily, yeah. I think it's, she's just, you at one point said that she just writes pretty uninhibited, very raw, very honest with her writing and how she feels about her country or her people or her family or whatever. And so I think that's pretty conducive to other Middle Eastern writers and stuff, that they're pretty honest.
Yeah, because I have to say, I don't know a whole lot. You would know more about those writings, but yeah, she was very harsh. Even if it was a children's story, well,
because it's kind of one of those things where it's like they live it, so why not write about it,
speak about it,
like not censor it, like duh, I'm not going to not tell the truth. So that's very interesting. It reminds me of, I don't know if I've talked about this woman before. I might have, but I might not have because she's still alive. But she's a poet. She's Somalian born, but she lives now in the UK, I believe. But her name is Warsten Shire. I think I'm pronouncing that right. I don't know. But she has a poem that became really famous during the Syrian refugee crisis in 2012 through like 2016, but I think the poem came out in like 2016-ish, and it's called Home. And pretty much the whole poem is just talking, it's one of my favorite poems. The whole poem is talking about and the line that's repeated is just like, you only leave home when home won't let you stay. And it's just kind of talking about, and it reminds me, even though she's not from the Middle East, she's from Somalia, but it's just the whole concept of like, I think a lot of times we think that people are like jumping the gun or trying to get here, and the whole poem is kind of just talking about like, I don't want to come here kind of, but like I have to. And the whole poem just talks about like, you only run for the border when the whole city's running as well. You only get into, she's like, and there's this one line, I don't remember how it goes, but pretty much saying like, you really think I'll put my kids in a boat because I want to? I only put my kids in a boat because the sea is safer than the land. And so it just reminds me of Emily's works where she has this tension between wanting to stay and wanting to have a country that will embrace her and embrace her, with all the things she wants to do and opportunities and stuff, but it's not. But you said she stayed the whole time in Lebanon,
She did,
right?
yeah. I mean, all her siblings, and that's why she wrote Birds of September, recounting her experience where she's super sad that like everybody else is left.
Yeah, but it's like kind of like, it's not a flippant decision.
No.
And I think even with like the Syrian refugee crisis, when we had all these migrants getting in boats and just kind of drifting in the sea, like you're not going to just do that because you're like, oh, I don't know if Syria's going to, it's like, this is a life or death decision. Like, you think I'm going to put my 5-year-old in a boat because I think this might be better than, like, no, dude, like it's because we see our city killing us. And so I think, I don't know, it just reminded me of that, but it also reminds me of like the immigrant and migrant experience in general. And
that's what I thought. It was relatable because I'm sure there's a lot of listeners, a lot of people who can relate to that, even if they're not from Lebanon. Whether it's that refugee crisis or even now, like with Afghanistan. I'm sure there's so many people. I think sometimes we look at somebody who's deceased and has works about something that happened 30, 40, 50 years ago, and they're like, okay, well, that was then. But I'm like, no, this is very relatable now.
Yeah, it is.
And it's sad, but it's true. So pouring into those works and seeing how people struggled similarly and made decisions, And
I love literature that does that as well, because then it also connects people that even though your experience is unique to you, you read literature and you read books and you realize you're not alone in that struggle. And I think that's also something that books do around the world, is that they connect people and they give ideas or they give words to something that you feel but don't know how to express. And it's like, oh, well, somebody else also experiences this or knows how I'm feeling, and they described it perfectly. And so I think that's also like, whether you're living in Lebanon or you're living in Syria or you're living in Somalia or, Haiti, it doesn't matter. Everyone, several countries, hundreds of countries identify with this struggle of wanting to stay but not wanting to stay, wanting to leave but not really wanting to leave kind of thing, and being sad when your family leaves but understanding why, but you can't pull yourself to do that as well because it's your home,
right?
And so I really,
it's just I mean, so many people I think just relate to that.
I can't relate to that, right. But hundreds of people can. I've never had to make the decision, not even with like a year in advance, but in like 2 or 3 days being like, oh, we got to get out. Like I've never faced that. I doubt I ever will. Yeah.
Like the crisis situation.
Yeah.
Or people in general who like in any country, I can, for example, like my mom, we moved from Puerto Rico to here.
Yeah.
And that's part of the US. It's not as drastic or as an emergency of a situation, but just because of better opportunities. And even today, if there's natural disasters like hurricanes in certain areas where you're taken away from your home and that sad feeling. And I think it was an interesting perspective because, number one, she did stay. I feel like a lot of literature that I've read, at least, is about somebody who's moved and their experience feeling alienated in the new place.
Yeah.
But having that flip side of the coin of somebody who has stayed and been like, wow, this is problematic. Let me tell you how this is problematic. Let me tell you my experience. I think that's an experience we hear less rather than the flip side. So I was just like, oh, that's the last thing I was expecting. But
yeah,
she did the thing.
But then she also did have a story or book or something about like her family members leaving and experiencing in Canada. And,
yeah.
So
I think that was more a story, a novel of
as opposed to her own account. But
correct, of like, these people did leave and that is what happened then.
Yeah.
So yeah, just
cool.
even that language of like a land who doesn't keep its people, I think it's just so beautiful. Because I think there's a lot of lands that can't keep their people as much as their people love their land.
Yeah. And even with like the refugee crisis in Afghanistan, now I had a conversation with a man like a month or two ago when this was all happening in Afghanistan, and he was telling me how he came here, and I asked him when he came here, and he said back in the 80s or 90s, and he expressed, he was like, yeah, I didn't want to come here. He was like, but he was like, I wanted my kids to have better opportunities. I didn't trust the government, and I didn't trust the U.S. especially. He wanted to go back. He was planning on going back to visit and maybe, I don't know, try to get his family to convince him to come up. But I don't think he ever went back to Afghanistan after moving here in the 80s, because he was like, as soon as the U.S. invaded, he was like, I didn't trust the U.S. there. I didn't trust my own country. I didn't trust the Taliban. I didn't trust any of it. So he never went back. But he was saying that, like, obviously it wasn't a flippant decision, but he was also like, here in America, he was like, I struggle to find a job. I have to kind of take lower paying jobs. He was like, but in Afghanistan, he was like, I was a doctor. I had degrees. He was like, but none of those count here. He was like, so why would I want to come here? Like, but I think
less.
Yeah, I think as Americans, we always think that, like, oh, everyone wants to come into this country because we have, and it's like, yes, they want to come here because it's safe. They don't really necessarily want to come here because we have like tons, I don't want to say tons for them, but just like, but I was just like, yeah, I never thought of it that way, that this man was like a doctor. He had clients. He had a lot of money. He had degrees. And now he has to come here and he struggles to find a job that pays a minimum wage because none of it counts here. And so I was just like, yeah, that sucks. Like, I don't know what else. I can't relate to that at all, but I was like, I'm sorry. Like, I hope that you find a better job, or I hope that he's actually going to school online so that he can find a degree here. He was like, but he was a professor. Like, he did all these things, and now he's almost like starting over. He's like, yeah, that's not something I wanted to do. It's a burden. It's a struggle to do it. So it's not a flippant decision, but I really like that you get that perspective, but then you also have Emily's perspective of staying. It's still struggling, but in different ways. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, I was just like, hey, Lebanon, you have an amazing history. I know you struggled a whole lot, but it was great to learn about Emily. And just, I think it's relatable, again, even today, if you're struggling with any portion of that, just reading somebody else's perspective, I think can be really enlightening. Yeah.
We'll have to read some of her stuff.
I don't know. Maybe
when did she die? You said recently, 2018?
2018.
Like
yeah. It was March 13.
March 13,
2018.
Yeah, I'll have to read some of her stuff.
A whole lot
posthumously, but cool.
Yeah, that's my first person.
That's your first person.
That's my first person.
My first person.
I'm so curious right now.
Okay, first of all, I'm not ill prepared, but I'm less prepared than Millie. But it's okay because I have a book.
I like butchered her biography. So.
No, you didn't. It's fine. Okay, so my first person is S Eliot, who he's one of my favorite poets because he wrote The Wasteland, which is not one poem, it's like a collection of poems, but anyway, called The Wasteland. And then his other poem that I always read his stuff around this time because it gives me very like fall wintry type vibes. But one of my absolute favorite poems, besides like, I don't know, the ones I started reading when I was a child, like I think the very first poem I ever read was The Raven by Poe, but
I was gonna say Poe. You like Poe?
Yeah, I do like Poe a lot. And then another, Let America Be America Again by Langston Hughes was another of the very first poems I remember reading as a child. But one of my favorite poems that I started reading as an adult is called The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, and it's by T.S. Eliot. And it's kind of lengthy, not very, but kind of. But it's just one of my favorite poems. So when I was thinking of people, I was like, because I've been reading this poem like every day, I love it. I absolutely love it. I was just like, T.S. Eliot. And he's one of the only poets that I really like from the modernist era that I really like, because I'm not a super big modernist, which is like early 20th century. He wrote a lot early 1900s, 1914, 1915, stuff like that, which is like kind of around World War I. That's the modernist era, but I just really, really love him. Ezra Pound is the other one I really, really love, but I really like T.S. Eliot more. But yeah, so I'm just like, it's pretty impressive that this man made me love modernist poetry, because I'm not a modernist in any sense of the word when it comes to poetry. But he was born in America. I think he was born in, I don't remember, but I have a book, so it's fine because I can cheat. He was born in St. Louis, Missouri. Okay, in 1888, and he went to Harvard, I believe. He went to an Ivy League college. He was extremely smart. He later moved when he was 18. I think he moved to England, and he started working there. He met his wife there, his first wife, and then it was. What's really funny about the modernist movement is that everyone knew each other, which was one aspect of the modernist movement I really enjoyed learning about in college. So usually when you have like writers, I want to say like before the 1850s.
You talked about how they're like so isolated.
They
live in a world
they
by
kind of
themselves.
are isolated, and I think writers are already kind of famous for that. Like Emily Dickinson, she didn't really interact with anybody, but a lot of writers are just so isolated, and it's just the nature of trains not being invented until the 19th century, but and communication taking so long and stuff like that. So it's just funny how you see technology advance writers as well. But the only two instances I can think of before the late 1800s of writers actually knowing each other and interacting with each other would be Wilkie Collins and Charles Dickens. And they had this kind of like frenemies relationship, which is really, really funny. But then later in the late 1800s, and the early 19th century, you have like modernists, or early 20th century, 1900s, you have modernists like interacting with each other. So T.S. Eliot knew Ezra Pound, who knew Gertrude Stein, who knew, and then they also knew like painters, like Picasso was involved. Like they all knew each other. They're all together.
A social club.
It was. They would hang out together in public places, and they were friends and blah blah blah. So I just really like T.S. Eliot. He was a British citizen. He renounced his American citizenship actually in 1927, I believe. He went to when he went to England, he loved it so much, and he loved having friends there and stuff.
So funny.
That's where everyone kind of gathered, was Europe. That's where like the modernist movement really occurred. But I don't know. I just think that's like so cool that for like pretty much the first time we see instances of like not just poets and authors, but also painters coming in. And one of my favorite quotes is not by Eliot, but it's by one of Eliot's friends, Gertrude Stein, who was a poet, a modernist poet. And she said she was very good friends with Picasso until later in life. And then they had some weird, he owes me money type of thing. But, and I think they died mad at each other, but anyway, but she had, and she said, the way that Picasso paints, I want to write like that. And so that was kind of like the overarching theme of the modernist movement that I think Eliot, out of all the poets, embodied the best. Even though he didn't say that quote, I just feel like his poetry is so abstract yet full of meaning. I think that's one reason why I don't love modernist poetry, is that it's so abstract you can't even get anything. I personally can't get anything out of it.
Maybe we're not smart enough, but
that's probably it. But T.S. Eliot, I feel like really like was just so, and if you have, go read The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. It's just so good. Or if you don't want to read the whole thing, I know if you go to poets.org or Famous Poets, and I don't know what it is, there's audio, you can just listen to it. But it's just such a journey reading it. It's so good. And I just really love the way he wrote. And I think he was just a really cool guy. He's super smart. Like he went to an Ivy League college and then just went to England and was like, I'm going to denounce my citizenship now to America because I love it here. And then his wife, he had a really tumultuous relationship with his wife.
It's okay. It was just a little messy.
He was very annoyed because she had a lot of health issues and was very sickly, which isn't her fault. But he was just like, they would have to send her away to different hospitals all the time. And so it was just kind of a tumultuous relationship. And finally, I think her brother put her in a mental institution against her will, pretty much. And she later died there. And then Eliot got remarried to another lady. And I think the relationship was fine or whatever. I don't really know. But I have this book called Writers, Their Lives and Works, which is like not thousands of pages. It's very large. It's like 500 pages of just like different writers. And I love it because it's all like categorized by like a timeline, but it's also categorized by like postmodern, modernist, contemporary, I love it. Like the writer in me, I will just flip. If I'm bored, I'll like flip through this and like discover a new author or whatever. But
Well, it's like that book you got me.
Yes, the
Business.
history one. Yeah.
Which I love so much.
But I really
We're boring people, I swear.
I know. I'm like I'm the most boring, uninteresting. I just sit here and I'm like, interesting. Let me read about dead people. But the quote they have at the top, which actually it's from The Hollow Men, which I had to read an excerpt of from in college. But it says, "This is the way the world ends, not with a bang, but with a whimper." And I don't know. I just really like him. I like the way his mind works as much as I can tell from his writing. And actually, fun fact, so the musical Cats that Andrew Lloyd Webber wrote, and God knows why, but is actually based off of T.S. Eliot's poem, not called Cats. It's called something else, but T.S. Eliot loved cats. And so he wrote a poem called Mr. Mistopheles, and then he had another one called something. But anyway, T.S. Eliot's is the inspiration for the musical Cats. So if you hate the musical Cats, I'm so sorry. But
if you liked it, you know the real reason why.
You need to read some T.S. Eliot, because T.S. Eliot wrote about cats. But yeah, so anyway, and he also struggled a lot with mental health issues and depression and stuff, but he wrote through it, and I think that's really admirable as well. So
it's
I really
relatable.
love T.S.
Old people are relatable. Dead people are relatable. Dead people, you can learn a lot.
I know. I just had to choose. I had to choose an old white man, but I just really love. He was at the top of my mind because I've been reading The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. Like,
watch us all read it now.
It's just one of my favorite lines. One of my favorite lines from the poem, because it follows like this man who's not really the narrator, but once again, hard to explain modernist poetry. But one of my favorite lines from the poem is, "Do I dare disturb the universe?" And I just think that's like, and the question is never answered in the poem. When you read it, you're reading a poem, but it's almost like narrative. And I just really love that quote of, "Do I dare disturb the universe?" And it kind of begs the question, like, oh, well, do I? What happens if I do? What happens if you don't? Kind of thing. And so I just really love that poem and the progression of it. And
dude, imagine having like tea with this man in some sort of cafe.
I know. And actually the mug
your mind would be blown.
Is literally, I mean, yeah. And like the mug I have that I sometimes the one I carry around that it's like black and white. If I have anything,
yes,
so
yes.
that's
and then
on
like,
it has a quote. Yes, it has a quote from T.S. Eliot on there, and it's not "Do I dare disturb the universe," but it's still from the Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, and it says, "I measure my life out in coffee spoons," which is from the poem as well.
Yes,
and so I just love. It's just like so many different like little anecdotes throughout the poem that are just like so good. It's just like so.
Just like how did your brain make that like single sentence?
Yeah.
What did you have there? What
and
was
it's
going
just
on?
you read the poem and you're like, you have a bit of an existential crisis. At least I do. Every time I think of "Do I dare disturb the universe?" it's just like it kind of almost reminds me of like the butterfly effect of like, if I make this decision versus this one, how will that affect everything else? And so it just gives you a lot of existentialism to think about. But
Gabby enjoys that.
I do, but I don't.
Torturing yourself.
But the only reason why I chose T.S. Eliot is because I just love him for writing that poem, because it's one of my favorites, and it's just so brilliant. And like the imagery, I know I'm going on and on. I just love this poem.
I love it so much.
Like the imagery of like just the way he writes. It's just go read it. It's just so brilliant. I love it so much. And the more you read it, you discover something new. Even now when I read it, like because I love reading it this time of year, because it just gives me like fall vibes. And so I'll read it and then be like, I didn't really like notice that last year, you know, but it's questions. There's a lot of questions in the poem, from "Do I dare to disturb the universe?" to "Do I dare to eat a peach? Do I dare to do this? And it's just so good. Like I just love it. Anyway, I would read it if it wasn't long, but it's long, so I'm not gonna.
It's okay.
It's not
take a little excerpt.
It's not as long as The Raven. Oh, I should have. Oh well, it's fine.
Well, Jax holds us accountable for our promo. You can have a little excerpt.
Well, I'll read a little excerpts from the Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. All right. Anyway, I'm done. T.S. Eliot. Go look him up. If you like cats, thank him. If you hate cats,
still thank him,
because someone out there loves
cats.
It. Hey, it made Andrew Lloyd Webber a lot of money.
Well, there you go.
It made a horrible movie. So
we discussed that.
James Corden.
Well, I don't know.
James Corden better have read.
He better congratulate.
That's all I gotta say. Anyway,
that was lovely. I look forward to reading this.
Just a lighter note there.
My second person, I'm not I'm going to try not speed through it, but I can talk about it like forever and ever. And when I tried to pick a woman from Puerto Rico because everybody knows, you should know, I'm Puerto Rican and I'm very passionate about it. And I went down like so many black holes of like history that I didn't know. And it took me forever to pick a person. So
I'm glad you're learning more about your culture.
I really am. I should know so much more. Like we are so involved in NASA. It's almost insane, which I told
That's
you,
very
the
funny, yes.
astronaut, because you think about NASA, it's like the 1% of the 1%, but like 50 Puerto Ricans are involved.
That's very good.
So funny. But anyway, this is another writer, and her name is Ana Roque de Dupri. These are names I can pronounce. So
now you're like, I'm not gonna mumble the name. I'm not gonna be like,
I'm not going to butcher this. She was born April 18th in 1853.
Oh, her birthday's right after mine.
There you go.
That's nice.
Twinsies. And she was born in Aguadilla, which is just a town in Puerto Rico. And by 3, she could read and write completely. Her mother taught her.
Okay. She's a genius.
She's already a genius,
Yeah.
and it just gets more impressive. Her mother died at 4, which is really sad, but she was taught by her father, aunt, and grandmother. This was like a family business. They were all educators. So she was very, very educated. By 11, she was the youngest teacher's assistant. And by 13, she opened up her own school. So already, I feel like a little piece of like nothing compared to her, but that's okay.
100%.
She wrote the geography textbook that she taught from, and it was used in other schools.
So she's like
making her own materials.
She's one of those teachers that's like, you have to have this book for class, and you look at the author and you're like, oh, because it's you. That's why you require this material.
Exactly. And she opened the school from her own home, and she was an educator for like the rest of her life, along with writing stuff in addition to all that. In 1872, she married her husband, Luis. He was a landowner, also a slave owner.
I love that.
Yeah, and her one condition to marry him was that she could teach the slaves and they would never bow. But don't worry, this bad character died shortly thereafter, 6 years later.
Miller's like, so don't discredit her.
Don't discredit her. And left her widowed with 3 young kids. And she was really happy about that. But she raised them still very, very well. After that whole ordeal, she taught in Arecibo, where she earned a bachelor's in philosophy and science. In 1893, she founded La Mujer, which means the woman, and it was the first magazine in Puerto Rico to be like woman-owned, woman-edited, for women, by women. We already know, kind of like...
I'm not gonna...
I won't do that, but it's really good. Hopefully that warms up your heart.
It made my heart grow very cold.
And in 1899, she became the director of the Normal School of San Juan. San Juan is the capital of Puerto Rico. And this follows shortly thereafter from 1898, which is when the U.S. invaded Puerto Rico. And she decided to teach English to her students so they could better communicate with the U.S. officials because they were ill-equipped to deal with these people because they didn't understand the language. So she was like, this is very, very important. In 1902, she established a teacher's academy, a high school for girls, and the College of Mayagüez, which now today is the University of Puerto Rico, which actually is where my mom studied at when she went there when she was 15. So yeah, very near and dear. She did a whole lot of things. She also was the first woman to go into the Anathenum of Puerto Rico, which is like where they keep plants and books and all that. And the first woman to be enrolled in, what's it called? I'm looking at Wikipedia, so hopefully Gabby doesn't judge me because
I'm not. I'm literally like holding a book,
but
and
I'm
I have screenshots on my phone. Like I'm very
But yes,
unprepared.
the first woman to become a member of the public library.
Nice.
I have so many tabs open. So you see, she had a book and I have tabs. Let me go to the one that I wanted. And then lastly, I'm getting to the main part of this whole thing.
Like how you have like bullet points and I just like rambled.
She also spent like so many years of her life working on a botany book about Caribbean trees and plants, like flora. Cool. And it's like the most comprehensive book of Caribbean flora that's yet to exist. And it was vastly ignored for the longest time because she was a woman writer.
That's very hard.
Yeah.
I would look at a blade of grass and be like, I think that's...
I am screaming. I don't know why she decided to do this, but she did. And we're very, very grateful. And it spanned over like 30 notebooks, and it's like 6,000 trees and plants. And she didn't just write about them, she would draw these really nice pictures. And there's a lot of effort nowadays to try to get this like journals like compiled and digitized so people can look at it, because even today people use it to learn how to better sustainably farm in Puerto Rico, which is like amazing to me because she's a little older compared to the other people we're talking about. So let's go to the tea. And this I didn't write notes, so I'm like, let me just look at this webpage.
Oh, this tea?
There is tea. Oh, so, which is considering women's suffrage. Okay. Oh, nice. So, which in case people didn't know, Puerto Ricans still can't vote for the U.S. president. We are citizens of the U.S. Okay. In 1917, the U.S. government passed the Jones Act, and I spent a whole semester in my college learning about it and how it kind of screwed Puerto Rico over. To this day.
Are we surprised about that?
We're not surprised. Not really. And when the Jones Act was passed, that made all Puerto Rican citizens of the U.S., but only allowing men to vote. Am I surprised? No, we're not surprised. And so when Anna noticed this, along with many other women, working women, mind you, they were like, wait, we need to vote. And they became the Puerto Rican Feminine League, which was dedicated to women's suffrage. But as they kind of did their research about the 19th Amendment, they realized it's not just about women voting, but about women holding office. So then they changed their name. It was cracking me up though. This is why I need a webpage, because they kept changing their name and then they split up over different differences and they had their own names. And I was just like, this is way too many names. But after it wasn't just about suffrage, but about women in general, they changed it to the Suffragist Social League in 1921, when it began to seek civil and political rights for women beyond suffrage, such as the right to hold public office. Now, this is when the tea began. And this is where Puerto Rico is super messy, because we're a mix of Taino Indians, African Americans, Spanish people. It's a mess. And when women were talking about this battle for their right to vote, there were some women who were of the mind that only educated or literate women could have the right to vote, not all women. Mm-hmm. And that was a concern of the elite, as Gabby likes to say, because usually they didn't want women to vote who were lower income, stay-at-home moms, and typically women of color. They didn't want them to have the power to vote. And so
problematic.
When it was really problematic. I'm like, y'all, what are you fighting for? I'm like, what difference does it make? But when that did happen, then they split and formed two different groups. Anna was in the good group, and she said, all women should have this right to vote. And it was interesting, though, having to think about the politics of it all, because, and I'll quote her in a second, because she knew she couldn't be too radical. She needed to give like an easier pill to swallow to men. So she said, because women are mothers, she said, when she goes to legislate in the House, she does so in compliance with her divine duty as a mother. She works for the good of all society's children, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And she was kind of, again, she's like, okay, all these men, they're not going to accept if I just say, hey, women are equal to men. We can do anything you can do. But we're like, hey, we're mothers. We should have a right in public office to speak on these things that affect us and all these things. And eventually, this argument won, but not in her lifetime. It was 2 years after. So she crawled so others could walk. And she's amazing. Like, I breezed through so much history, but I think I of course learned about women's suffrage in America when I was in elementary school. But thinking about the battle, I hadn't even thought about that. Although I did know when my parents told me, yeah, we're not allowed to vote for the president if you live in Puerto Rico. But the fact that when the Jones Act was passed, that's one part that I didn't know about it. I know about taxes and tariffs and all that other stuff that was not good. But the fact that they were like, yeah, you're all citizens, and although women can vote in the U.S., only Puerto Rican men can vote. And then the women were at the forefront and saying like, that's not good. So amazing. If you are interested in botany, you can do that. She had a bunch of articles. She did have books. She wrote music. She studied and wrote music. It doesn't mean that it was amazing, but she was like, you know what?
She did it anyway.
All that while teaching. So
we love a suffragist.
We do love that. And I was just like, I didn't know about sis. I mean, Puerto Rico has a ton of famous women who fought just in general for women's rights and all that. And she's one of the less radical people, which I was like, it's okay. We still need to talk about her. I felt bad. She wasn't as included, especially since it didn't happen in her lifetime. But I think her mind was in the right place. And
doesn't that just suck when like you have like an activist or a writer or somebody that dies? Like,
dude, and then
all these
it comes to pass.
Yeah,
so I was really like, wow, she crawled so others could walk.
Yeah.
But yeah, and just learning more about my island's history and in general, since Puerto Rico is part of the U.S., everybody should know. Yeah, everybody else crack jokes, but it's very, very important. And there's cool. Again, she was a writer. It's just her work was focused around writing about.
It was like academic writing,
which is still writing. Or botany. But
botany.
It's okay, botany. And I was like, whoa, when
of
did
all
you do
subjects,
this?
But
she was like,
you know what?
That.
And she sketched out the plants and things.
And she drew them. So she could.
She's
and
an
it didn't look
artist
bad.
as well.
It wasn't like sticks. It was like actual like.
Well, yeah. If you're gonna be a botanist, you probably should like.
I don't know.
It's kind of bad if you're like, I want to do like a book on botany, and then there's one flower that could poison you and another one that will heal you, and drawing is crap. Then someone dies because
and they look nice. I saw a few images and I was like, oh gosh, this could like actually.
You gotta like actually be good.
Do the thing.
That's what I'm saying. Like I would look at one flower and be like, that looks the same as that. I don't know.
I would still have the page in front of me and be like, is that it?
I would be so bad.
Like I said, we're not the smartest
But this is
people.
why other people are doing the things and we don't have to.
But yeah, just a little history. That was a very quick overview because I knew I could go on and on forever. So I'm like, let me cap myself here. I pulled up the webpage and I'm like, this is where I'm going to end. This is it.
Love that.
But no,
cool.
That was my second person.
Nice. Well, my last person is here's the thing.
Okay,
I'm not
good.
even necessarily.
I like how this is starting.
I'm not even necessarily wanting to talk about. I mean, I'll talk about her as a writer, as a person, but and once again, I can't remember if I've mentioned her on this podcast before or not. But she's dead. She died only a few years ago, 2019, I think. But Toni Morrison, and I'm only bringing her up because people are losing their life over banning her books. So because this is our podcast and I can do what I want with it, I'm going to talk about her and why you shouldn't be banning her books like idiots. So that's just what I'm using this platform for. So Toni Morrison.
I should have seen this coming.
Well, because she's been in the news recently.
Yes.
And if she was still alive, she would be destroying everybody. But she's not still alive. So here we are. And she's in this book as well.
She is.
Of Writer's Month. I don't know what page. I have to find it. But
is she right next to S Eliot?
She's not. She's a little bit. She's not in the modernist movement. But I don't know if they put her under. I think she was still alive when this book came out. So she's probably under writing today. Oh. But I don't know. And I don't see her name. Maybe she wasn't alive when this book came out.
In the index.
Hold, please, for... Oh, no, there she is, 308. So, yeah, this book, she must have still been alive when this book came out. But anyway, so, yeah, Toni Morrison. The first time I read Toni Morrison, I think I was in college, but I don't think it was for a college class.
Not in high school?
No, definitely not. I mean, not in school in high school, but I don't think I read... I take that back. I think I read God Help the Child maybe when I was in high school, but it wasn't for a high school class. It was like on my own. I read it or whatever. But her most famous book is Beloved. And that's the one that's kind of coming under fire now in our state, in Texas, and a bunch of other states, I'm sure. But about people wanting to ban it from being read in schools. But it's a book about kind of like the post effects of slavery. And so, not to spoil anything, but the book pretty much centers around this woman who kills her child after being raped by white men, and she kills her child because she doesn't want her child to feel to be subject to slavery as she was, because she escaped from slavery, this character. And so that's the premise of the book. But throughout the book, she's haunted by the ghost of this child that she killed, and blah blah blah. It's a whole thing. Read it. It's a great book. But now people are saying there are different petitions, different conversations about getting rid of the book and not allowing it in schools, which I think is really stupid, because it talks about slavery and it talks about the effects of slavery. Mm-hmm. It doesn't necessarily talk about slavery itself, but it talks about the trauma that follows generations, which I think is really interesting take. But she was a very outspoken woman. It's really funny because every few weeks or months or whatever, sometimes different things will be circulating about Toni Morrison, or videos will come up of interviews she had done back in the 80s and 90s about her writing. And I don't remember who it was, but there was one interviewer who asked her when she would stop writing about Black people and start writing about white people. And and it was really brilliant the way she answered it. It was very smart. She didn't respond like, oh, that's a really stupid question. Why'd you? But she responded in just a very like amazing way, a very respectful way, but she like read him for filth. And I just really enjoy her. She had a sense of humor. She's dead now, but she had a fairly normal, she got married, she had a son. Her son actually died, I think, in his 40s of cancer, maybe. And the book she was working on at that time, she stopped working on it because she was obviously like very upset about her son's death. But she ended up finishing it. But she is very outspoken about, had been outspoken about race relations. When the Black Lives Matter movement began and there were different Black men being killed, she was very outspoken about where our country was going in terms of racism coming not alive again, because I don't think it ever died, but being on the rise again. And I don't know, she's just like a lady who's classy but will destroy you and like and so much. So when this whole conversation began like a few weeks ago about banning her books, I was like, oh, she would hate this. And if she were alive, something to say. She would have something to say about it. But it really begs the question, and now people on Twitter are like talking about, you know, people of color on Twitter, specifically Black people, are talking about the first instance when they like knew they were being prejudiced against or knew they were experiencing racism themselves. And it reminds me of Toni Morrison, and it kind of was really nice because I was like, oh, Toni Morrison would say this. Like, there are people who are still spouting her ideas and stuff, what I think is really cool. So the impact that she made, I think, is really great, and it can still be felt now. But and so people were just saying, you know, because of her book being banned, and this isn't the first conversation that people have had over wanting to ban her books because they are graphic, but at the same time, I think they're necessary. And anytime there's a conversation about a book being banned from schools, I think it's just stupid because I just don't get it. I just don't understand why you would ban any book from school. And it's funny because I remember being in elementary school and like I had a book on my desk because I always had books on my desk. And my teacher walked by and she looked at it and she was like, why do you have this? And I was like, oh, because when I have free time or recess, I'm going to read it. And I remember she was like, well, let's not bring this one to school because the cover was quote unquote scary or something. And she was like, that might offend like other children or that might scare other children. And I was like, I don't care about other kids. And I was like, well, they're not reading it. So I like turned it over and I was like, whatever. But she told me like not to bring it back. And I was like, I'll kill you. But anyway, so it's really, really great. But
that's where it began.
Maybe that's where it began. Third grade when I was reading a Goosebumps book and it had a scary cover and my teacher didn't like it. But anytime the conversation about this comes up in Toni Morrison's books, I'm like, yeah, they're graphic, but I think they're necessary. And so now the conversation on Twitter that people are having, it's like, well, when do we start teaching our kids about race through or racism through books? And I think if Toni Morrison were still alive, she'd be like, whenever, like all the time. Because, you know, and someone made a good point on Twitter. They said, like, I had to experience racism when I was in first grade. So why are we waiting to teach kids about racism till they're in high school or now out of high school? Because it's like, I just don't get it. I just think it's really stupid. And I just think that it should be one of those things that it's taught all the time, forever through literature. And I think literature is a lens to see the world. And I think if you're going to teach about something, teach it through the writings of a woman who experienced it firsthand and had a lot to say about it. And I just really love Toni Morrison and her sass and everything she had to say about it. There was nothing she wouldn't talk about. She never backed down from a question. She was eternally respectful, but would destroy you, which I think is the best when like someone's respectful and would
be like, you know what, let me say what I have to say.
Yes, but could still like destroy the interviewer, whoever.
Which I think is like a loss nowadays, but
it is. Yeah, and actually there is a quote from Beloved on this page. Her story was bearable because it was his as well, to tell, to refine, and tell again. And she was super smart too. I believe she went to Harvard. maybe she went to Howard University. I don't know, but she ended up teaching at Cornell. She was a teacher. She was a professor. She was obviously a writer. And she was a writer like till late in her life. It's not like one of these writers. I think we always think of writers and they're like, oh, they must have had the first book published at the age of 3. Like super smart people. But she was extremely intelligent and started publishing later in her life. And so I don't know. I just really love her. And I only am bringing her up because of the conversation that's happening now. But yeah, so read her book.
Yeah, I don't know if you've brought her up before, but
read all of her books. Beloved, God Help the Child. It's a very good one. Sula, very good. Yeah, she has a book called Sula. So and she's I think she's a Nobel Peace Prize winner as well. Which I think is funny that we give someone the Nobel Peace Prize and then we try to ban her books from schools. I don't know. It just makes no sense to me. But that's just a passionate subject matter that I'm passionate about because I think it's stupid. And I just think it really robs kids from learning about, different views of life as well as just reading a good book. Like, come on, just read it. Maybe kids hate reading because you ban books that are really, really good.
Maybe
like the conversation about To Kill a Mockingbird that's been going on since the book was published.
Like I read the thing is anyway. Let's not.
Sorry, I just said it because once again this is our podcast and I can talk about what I want. So I just thought, you know what, I'm going to talk about her today.
We did talk about what we wanted. We learned about lots of good writers that you should look more into.
Yeah.
Oh, what's your story?
It's not related, but this is not related at all. Yes, lighter note maybe. But I saw this the other day on the internet, and I thought it was so funny. This is completely out of left field. It's like completely out of left field. Okay, so this thing that happened. It's like ancient old-timey times, which I'm not super familiar with, but it's fine. But it's about Xerxes the First. So like 480 BC. I
don't know what hole of the internet you were in.
I don't remember where I saw this, but it's really, I think it was Reddit probably. But this instance where Xerxes the First of Persia, this was in 480 BC, and this cracked me up. So he's trying to build bridges for his second invasion of Greece. And across the modern day Dardanelles, which is in Turkey, modern day Turkey. But he needed to, I think it was called the Hellespont at the time, but he's trying to build bridges to invade Greece from where they were. And so he needs to build bridges to get across the modern day Dardanelles. And so he hires a bunch of people. They build these bridges for him. He gets there to cross with all his army and military people, realizes that the bridges were destroyed by a storm, so they cannot cross. He kills the people he had hired to build these bridges. He executes them because, of course, it was their fault. It was their fault. And then he punishes the sea. So this is what happens.
Wow.
And this really cracked me up. Once again, I'm sure no one else finds this funny, but it says Xerxes the First was enraged and had those responsible for building the bridges beheaded. He is then said to have thrown fetters into the strait, given it 300 whiplashes, and branded it with red-hot irons as the soldiers shouted at the water. So his soldiers are all like punishing the sea for being like,
I get that.
A total like,
watch me do that on my next like beach vacation. I'm gonna punish the sea.
The thought of a whole army of grown men like throwing whips into the sea, being like, curse you, you stupid idiot, cracks me up. I love it. I think it's amazing. Some people are skeptical if this happened or if it was just Greek propaganda. I wholly believe this happened.
I can believe that. I can believe that.
Think that's unfortunately. So and so they punished the sea for several days.
Wow, this was quite the scourge.
They flogged the heck out of the sea.
Wow.
The sea felt the Xerxes' wrath, I'm sure. And then he hires new people to build the bridges. They build the bridges. They cross over. They invade Greece. Then the dramatic irony is then they're coming back to get out of Greece after invading. The bridges were destroyed and they couldn't get out. So
did they punish the sea again? Nah,
I don't think they punished
have the
sea again. They didn't have the flogging materials. But I thought that was hilarious.
That's quite the story.
That these grown men are like shouting at a body of water, and everyone else was like looking over, like, what are they doing? Like, what is happening? Anyway, that just really cracked me up.
That could probably happen nowadays. But
all I got.
I love that. That's fitting. That's a fitting way to end this podcast. So even if you don't like our writers, hopefully you enjoyed the little anecdote. This was a good episode.
I feel really good about it.
I feel really good about it. And we hope you enjoyed it because
I know I
learned a lot.
enjoyed it.
We know you enjoyed it, Gabby.
Oh man.
But yeah,
Go throw some branding irons in the sea and
have some fun.
Punish it.
And while you're at it, follow us at _change by degrees.
Do it.
Give us a rating on iTunes.
Do it.
Do all the things. Do it. Do it.
Do it.
Just do it.
Do it.
And then do it next week when we catch you.
Yeah. All right. Bye.